Please welcome to the stage, Katherine Phillips.
Hi everyone. I know you're just getting back from a coffee break, but welcome back. Katherine Phillips, I'm a principal at BCG. At BCG I work on a lot of decarbonization topics with startups, with investors, and with corporations. And have been interested in DAC since before I started BCG, which was now many years ago, when I was a postdoc studying carbon capture materials. First got interested in direct air capture. And I'm very excited to be here to talk about some of the topics that I've been working on around financing DAC. So the purpose of my presentation, I have three main goals of it. So the first is to kind of introduce financing in DAC, really lay out the problem. I think most of you are familiar with it, but hopefully it will help consolidate and it will tee up the rest of my presentation and then also the panel that we have afterwards. The second goal is we put on a event during Climate Week in September about financing DAC, and we'll share some of the findings from that. We have an article that will go into more detail that will come out later this week that you can read about it, but we'll introduce some of the findings that we had and some of the takeaways that we put together. And then finally, at the end of my presentation, I'm actually going to have all of you discuss at your table. I know you've done a little bit of that already today, but taking some time to think about specifically within financing, kind of where you see the opportunities and the gaps. So that's the goal. That's the overarching structure that I'll have. I'm going to, again, start with some slides that may be familiar, some concepts that may be familiar to many of you, but hopefully lay out exactly what it is we're talking about. So this is something that I'm sure most, if not all of you, have seen some variation of this slide, of the various valleys of death that technologies take as they go from a lab to large-scale commercialization. They're all really hard. They're hard for different reasons. The one we're focused on now is this last one. So going from early deployment to large-scale commercialization. And the reason this is hard is because it is much larger scale. So we're talking about $50 to $100 million of investment for projects typically. And the technology still isn't proven. So in the earlier stages, there's historically government grants and venture capital funding that can get you there. But that next step, what's often called first of a kind, that we'll be talking about in this session and the panel right afterwards, it's a very different problem, and the financing becomes the bigger part of the challenge. And that's really where DAC is today. Not all DAC companies, but as an industry, that's kind of the hurdle that the DAC industry is facing. And so that's why we're spending so much time on it. Okay, and why is this challenging, particularly for climate tech? So a lot of the challenges with that size scale of plant are no matter what. It's hard to build a large capital project, but if you look at climate tech in particular, and newer technologies as well, they have this high risk, but they don't come with the high financial return. So if you do a oil and gas project, they're also high risk, but you can make a ton of money off of them at the end, and so it kind of the financing can work out. But there's this challenge with finding investors that will accept a lower return or kind of de-risk to make the project lower risk so that you can get closer to this line of where financing can get unlocked and become much easier. Okay, so that is more context of where exactly we are in this position, how this typically works. And again, some of you are probably experts in this and have set many of these up. But for those of you who haven't, there's usually the project developer that sets up a special purpose vehicle. There's a bunch of suppliers and EPCs. There's financing that goes specifically into that. So this is project. So earlier stage, you're typically talking about financing for the company. This is specifically for the project, how it all fits in. And the thing that you need to make this work is this number one ball on the far right, the stable cash flows. So the financing can be unlocked if you can really have this stable influx of money over the lifetime of the project. So you put money in to build the project, and then you get money over the lifetime of the project.
This is like, I think most of you already know this, but I like calling it out because it is something that can really unlock capital and unlock project financing. And we saw this in the solar industry with the power purchase agreement. Before there were power purchase agreements, it was really hard to get financing for solar projects. And then they started becoming more and more popular, and it became much more it became much easier to get financing for solar projects, and it really came down to the fact that you de-risked the cash flows at the end, and so you were able to get financing for the specific projects that you had, and that really is one of the things that unlocked the solar to scale much quicker than it would have otherwise. Okay, that's most of my general context. I think that the challenge here is you're combining the challenges of large capital projects with the challenges of new tech scale-up, with the challenges of nascent green markets. So this is a framework we put together. There's a lot behind it, but I wanted to keep it at this higher level for this, where there's a range of risks when you're building a large capital project. And climate tech in general has all 5 of them, and DAC, they're kind of all exacerbated. So the bottom 3, the finance and regulatory risk, permitting risk, and execution risk, are common whenever you're building a large capital project. So oil and gas companies deal with this all the time. Solar industry still deals with this. There's extra challenges when you have a newer technology because the technology isn't necessarily proven. So that adds additional risk on top. And then the commercial risk, where if the market is nascent and there's not kind of clear off-takers for whatever it is you're providing, then that also creates a lot of risk. So this is in general for climate tech why this is hard. And again, DAC, it's even more exacerbated because the technologies are often earlier scale. The commercial risk is even more so. So if you do a large LNG plant, you want to sell out half of the plant before you build it. You have kind of agreements in place beforehand. With something this risky, you need to sell out a lot more, above 90, if not 100% of the plant, which then means you have to, before you've even built the plant, start selling out the offtakes, which of course we're seeing in the market, and we're seeing that happen. And there are buyers coming in to do that, but it does, create challenges, especially as you get to bigger and bigger scale. So that's the commercial risk, and that, again, climate tech in general has this commercial risk. DAC even more so because if the actual product you're selling is kind of this nebulous carbon removal credit that has a lot of, today, voluntary support, but needs more robust market in order to kind of simplify those processes. Otherwise, we're still going to be in this zone where we need to be selling out the full plant. And that's on top of, I think, the technology risk, I think, is more straightforward. And then the regulatory and permitting risk, I think we'll talk more about on the panel as well. But these are also exacerbated for DAC because it is newer types of projects that haven't been built before. So again, I know I'm repeating myself, but we're really talking about a challenging stage of development that DAC is facing now. It's common across climate tech. And it is exacerbated for DAC for a number of reasons. How this is typically addressed, there's a range of things. This isn't even exhaustive, but I think it's good to think about grants, often from governments, where you can just kind of reduce the cost because you're funding. Subsidies, so that would be more like the 45Q tax credit, where it kind of improves the economics, it de-risks the offtakes a bit. Number 3 isn't really a form of finance, but it does unlock finance around the offtake agreements. And again, this is about de-risking the fact that once you make the product, you'll actually be able to sell it. And so it's really important for investors to be comfortable with the project. And then there's a bunch of different types of a lower return or concessional capital, either with loan guarantees that the government has historically done in some areas, concessional finance with things like first loss capital. So, okay, we'll put this money in. If the project does well, we'll make a return on it. If it doesn't, we'll be the first dollars to go, which then de-risks the other dollars that come into play, or just a lower return, so we'll accept a 3% return or a 5% return and let the other investors get a 10 or 15% return. And so this is why you see a lot of climate investors kind of pushing on some of these different areas, because it's not just the dollars that they're putting in, but it also enables additional investors to come in who wouldn't accept those lower returns or who wouldn't do a first loss loan, but can de-risk the project for them. Okay, so within all of this context, we put together an event at Climate Week in September. So this was held in my office in Hudson Yards, but it was organized by me and Jason from DAC Coalition and Beth from the DOE. I will say it was a slightly different policy environment than we are in today, but what we talked about was different ways that we can kind of improve the financing for direct air capture. We brought together a lot of the companies, the developers, and tech developers. We brought together investors. Given the stage of the industry, there aren't that many / none that have really done a project finance project for a direct air capture company. But we brought in investors who had done it in adjacent areas or who had done other types of finance for direct air capture. And then we had a good DOE contingent as well. We talked about 3 different topics, so a little bit of like what went right, so what were the pivotal moments that we needed to help DAC scale up. And this was a combination of across a lot of, it was not specific to finance. This is interesting to see, but I think was a nice, like, okay, what are the headlines instead of what could have happened, but what did happen in order for it to reach the scale that we all think that it can. And then talked about specific interventions that could help enable those. And this is what I'll get a little bit more into in the next page, but what are the types of innovative financing, policy and regulatory support, any value chain collaboration that can be done. I'll also mention here that at the time, the DOE was doing a lot of the things that we had highlighted that came up in the policy and regulatory support discussion, which now, of course, is uncertain. I think some of them are likely to say, some of them might not happen. But the DAC hubs came up as a big benefit. The DOE purchasing prize came up, and then also within the DAC hubs, the TA1, where you have like kind of support for development, came up as a big benefit. So we're interested to see kind of what happens there, but also how other players are filling some of those gaps. And then we tried to collectively call to action what are things that we can do to help DAC as an industry scale up for different stakeholder groups, because we all have our own different parts to play. We're talking about finance, but there's actually things that other actors can do to help unlock finance. And that really brings me to this page. So on the left is this ecosystem of direct air capture with the tech developers and project developers at the center, and then government, industry groups, standard setters, finance, and buyers kind of all playing different roles within that. And so I wanted to call out the 3 kind of biggest takeaways from the event. Again, this will be covered in more detail in our article that should come out later this week. And also we'll discuss it a bit more on the panel right after this. But the 3 were one for DAC developers. The piece that is challenging is there's so many pieces that have to come together to develop a DAC project. Many of you know this very well, but where you can collaborate, there's potential for benefits both on cost, on time, on other components that can help with the like pure project development type angles. And that's where like the TA1 and we'll have Phil from Deep Sky who can talk about a little bit more about this later. The second one is the other ecosystem players. So the buyers, standard setters, industry groups, even governments, thinking about what role they can do is, I know there was already panels on demand, but one thing that we identified was one thing that's a barrier to new buyers and even new investors, is that they just don't understand the space yet. And so far, a lot of purchases have been bilateral, custom designed agreements. And so to the extent various ecosystem players can do different things to provide transparency into the selection and purchasing process to lower those transaction barriers, to help stimulate demand. But this was something that we identified specifically as a gap today of, a new buyer. Yes, there are marketplaces, but given the number of companies, given the potential risk of working with some of the newer companies, kind of showing what the process is for selecting and purchasing, both selecting, so like which company should I go with, but also like what does this look like? How long does this usually take in terms of the purchasing process, particularly if you do continue down these bilateral agreement route. And then finally, on the investor side, there were a lot of things that we discussed. One that we felt was pretty straightforward and easy was just like offering something that prices the risk. So even if you think the risk is very high, you just at least offer the loan at a high rate, which then, if you have concessional capital, you can potentially stack it on top, but is better than like literally not having any options at all. And can help the investors get comfortable with it and help the project scale. The first projects always are going to be hard, but as we continue down the path, reducing the risk, getting more players involved so that we can really have the inflection point that we kind of are at right now. Okay, so that's actually all I have to present. I wanted to take some time for everyone to discuss in a group what they think the biggest challenges are and what they think the biggest opportunities are. So we have 8 minutes left. I do have a Slido, but I'm not sure how well it's going to work, so I'm just going to take a few minutes to discuss at your tables these 3 interventions, or if there's other things that you want to come up with. And then if I can get it to work, we can vote on both the challenges and also submit some solutions. But if not, you can hold them until after the panel. We'll have some time for Q&A, so you can bring those there. So I'm going to pause now and let you guys discuss with your tables these 3 interventions that I've just walked through that came up with at our panel.